Hey everybody, how's it going? It's me, Logan Joyce, aka Suburban Yinzer, and right now I'm back down in Southside. It's been a couple of months since I've done a video in the neighborhood, the old neighborhood of my father and my grandparents, great-grandparents. So just to give a wee bit of a recap, I'm going to be going into a complex explanation, thorough explanation about the neighborhood. And I'm going to give a thorough explanation about the neighborhood and the surroundings and the people, my ancestors that made this the neighborhood or the community. So first what we'll do is we'll start out with the oldest building, basically the building that harbored my ancestors the longest, and that is the bar right there on the corner of South 27th and Jane, presently Chipko's 1. That was owned and operated by my great-great-grandparents, the Rebels, Charlie and Minnie Rebel, from the early 1900s to, let's just say, I'd say the mid-1930s. Charlie and Minnie Rebel were the grandparents of my grandfather, Jerome Mooch Joyce. Mooch visited that bar many times and ate turtle soup there, ate sandwiches during the, let's just say, the early to mid 1930s when he was a little kid. He was born in 1928. And so Charlie and Minnie Rebel were Germans. They were descendants of German immigrants. And they owned and operated that bar for a couple decades into the early 1900s. Now, right here, this house on the corner of 27th and Jane, that was lived in by the Italians, the Gelatis. So many again know this was my great-grandfather's shoe shop, Joe Gelati. Joe Gelati was from Pentone, Italy. He came to America in 1921 legally, and he owned and operated that shoe shop from, I would say, the early 1930s to the 1960s in general. Now, what's really cool is Joe, the shoemaker, as many people refer to him in the old neighborhood, all the people that grew up here, he was able to acquire that storefront because of his familial relations to the Rebels across the street. Now, to give a wee bit of a background here, the Rebels and the Gelatis, so the Rebels, the Joyces, the Arias, and the Gelatis were all connected at the hip at one certain time period. So come closer to, we're going to go down, we're going to look down 27th Street. Right now, this is Jane Street. So coming down a couple houses down on 44 South 27th Street, 1920, it was owned by Joe and Mary Aria. That is my great-great-grandparents. That is the parents of my great-grandma, Mary Gelati, who was the wife of Joe Gelati, the shoemaker. Now, in 1920, Grandma Gelati, Mary Gelati, was living at 44 South 27th Street, 1920. Her parents, Joe and Mary Aria, were Italian immigrants. Joe was from Naples, Italy. Mary was from Sicily, which is the island next to the boot, or the toe of the boot in Italy. Regardless, what's really cool is that the Arias and the Rebels were neighbors. Very good familial relations and good affiliations. Now, this carried over decades later. Now, when Joe was trying to acquire a shoe shop in Southside, he was able to do that because Marie Joyce, Mooch's mother, she knew many of the people that owned and operated these storefronts and these properties around Southside during the 1920s and 30s. So by the 1930s, when she was able to acquire this storefront from many of the people that she knew in the community, Joe Gelati then moved in here from Brentwood, and then the Arias and the Gelatis came down. But once my great-great-grandparents, Joe and Mary Aria, died in the early 1930s, who lived right there in Southside at the time during the 1920s, when they died in Brentwood, they had to move down there to those upper floors up there on 2701 Jane Street, and that is where the Arias and the Gelatis lived from the 1930s to the 1960s. That is where my grandma, Rose Gelati Joyce, was born and raised practically most of her early life in Southside. Now, if we walk down the street, we walk down Jane Street a little bit, we can see many of the different homes, different houses down here in Southside. Now, you look this way, 2708 James Street is presently where my mother is sitting right now. That is where my grandfather Mooch and my great grandparents Scrappy and Marie Joyce, that is where they lived in the 1940s during World War II. This building right here, this is where many of my ancestors lived during the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Ironically, this building, 51 South 27th Street, is where my father was basically born and raised. This was his first residence. Ironically, right across the street, as you can see, from Rebel's old, it was at the time Rebel's born in the early 1900s, and then his grandparents' shoe shop, 2701 James Street, across the street. So as you can see, as you might realize, this is the neighborhood. It was a community at the time. And during that time period, the neighbors were not only your relatives, but they were also your adopted relatives, if you know what I mean. The stories that my dad told me is that many of the people that lived in these homes, that lived in these streets of James Street and 27th Street at the time, not only were they neighbors, but they were also family friends that spanned generations, because you never really left the neighborhood. These people might not have been blood relation, but they grew up and lived next to each other for many different decades. And that's the really important thing to realize about the history and the sentimentality of the neighborhood of Southside, of 27th Street, James Street, Sarah Street, all of Larkin's Way. You must realize that at that time, the neighborhood was like a community, it was a family. And that is why it's so sentimental, and that's why it's so important to reflect upon it and to tell these stories, because they're very important, not only to reflect on the history, but to reflect on the people that made this place a neighborhood and a true community. But anyway, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be stopping this segment, and we're going to be walking down the street to Sarah Street to elaborate more on my ancestors that lived down on Sarah Street in Southside in the early 1900s. So let's go. So right now I'm standing below Michael's Pizza Bar. It used to be Michael's Pizza and Bar until it closed down a couple months ago, sadly. Michael's is where my family, where my mom and dad and me used to eat for many years, for many decades down here in Southside. So come closer. So as you can see right here, Michael's was established in 1984 and it closed down in 2025. So basically 41 years it lasted. My dad remembers, though, since my dad grew up here, he remembers when this was called EB's, or Emil's. Now, the thing is that Emil Brnilovic was born in Yugoslavia in 1897. That is who Emil's, or EB's, was named after. Him and his wife, Martha Brnilovic, she was also Yugoslavian. They came to America, and when they settled in Southside, they owned and operated this bar, this restaurant called EB's. In 1950, the Brnilovic family lived and operated this bar front. And what's really cool is Miko Brnilovic, who we call as Mitch, his daughter is good friends with our family. He also lived here. So before this was called Michael's, this was called EB's, or Emil's, for many again that probably remember that from the old Southside days. They come this way. So not only was this Michael's, but this was also a place that we would frequent many times, like I already said. It's a very sentimental and special place. It's a real shame that this place at 2612 Sarah Street closed down. I'm not going to get into the specific details, not going to get into the nitty-gritty about it, because there's no point to reflect on the past. But we must. I want to basically give homage and give a wee bit of sentimentality and a little bit of credit to this place. This place is very special for me and my family. Many memories, many good times are had here, and I feel that it is necessary not only to reflect upon that, but to reflect on just the legacy of Michael's. It's a shame that it closed down. It's a shame what happened to it, and many people in Southside can agree with me that maybe it wasn't handled the right way. Maybe things didn't go the right way with it. But the fact of the matter is that we must go back to the past, not dwell on the bad times, but focus and reflect on the good times and that is how this place should be remembered always. But anyway, I'm gonna go walk down Sarah Street a little bit and show you a wee bit more history about Sarah Street and my family. All right, so anyway, I walked down Sarah Street a wee bit, and right now I'm standing in front of the AOH Division Number 1 building, and as you can see at the top of the building, it says Division Number 1 AOH 1909. That is when the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which was my Irish Catholic ancestors' organization, opened up AOH Hall. That is where my great-great-grandfather Martin Joyce and my Irish Catholic ancestors held their meetings weekly, probably weekly or monthly. And me and my father are currently members of AOH Division Number 1, but in the South Hills. This division closed up, Division Number 1 of my great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, many of the Irish Catholic ancestors down here in Southside. This closed up in the early 1960s. My great-grandfather, Walter Joyce, Scrappy, who grew up in this area, was a divisional president of AOH Division Number 1. But what's really cool about this area, though, not only is this building sentimental to my father's side of the family. Oh, is that okay? No, you can go. You can go. No, you can go behind me. It's all good. No, you're doing your job. And so, not only was this place AOH Hall, but also my ancestors, the Joyces, lived at 2720 Sarah Street, a couple doors down. In 1910, literally right across the street from AOH Hall, Martin and Bridget Joyce, who were from Ireland. So it was very accessible and very convenient for them to not only have the AOH Hall across the street where they had their meetings and their parties, but also to live across the street at 2720 Sarah Street. So as we walk down this way, we can start to see, though, the many different residencies that my ancestors lived, not only on this side, not only on the 27 odd side, or no, even side, not only the 27 even side, but also the 27 odd side. Many of my ancestors lived here not only in the early 1900s, but also in the late 1900s. My great-grandma, Mary Gelati, also lived. Mom, what was Grandma Gelati's address? 27 what? 2716, which is ironically right there, right behind Colin. Look, that's the house. That is 2716 Sarah Street. That is where my great-grandmother, Mary Gelati, as many of you know, that was the shoemaker's wife, Joe Gelati, who lived on 27th of Jane, 2701 Jane Street. Him and his wife lived here in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And what's cool is that not only did they live here, but she also lived across AOH Hall. And she remembers, she also told my dad, she remembers when that was AOH Hall and they would have their meetings there. Not only meetings, but also weddings and different parties, different functions were held up at that hall, because that hall was rented out not only to Irish people, but also all people. But anyway, I would like to commend this video not only to the AOH, but also to all my Southside ancestors that lived on Sarah Street, and to reflect on the family history on this street of Sarah Street in the south side of Pittsburgh.